This deck build looks at an archetype that I feel a lot of players designed suboptimally, seemingly based on a misunderstanding of the general strengths of the archetype. The deck in question? Triamid. Starting with the standard operating procedure of examining the existing direct support. Opening with the boss monster, Sphinx is a solid, heavy hitter, but not a monster that is overwhelming by itself. With a base attack of 2500 that can easily hit 4000 or even 4500, Sphinx can hit over almost anything outside of the Stray Utopia the Lightning with requisite material. The special summons condition is rather nice, for it comes out to play if a non-Sphinx Triamid destroyed. It's not conditional on anything. The destruction does not need to be by the opponent. It does not need to be by battle. If your opponent destroys a Triamid field spell or pulse for some reason, this guy can hit the field. Heck, one strategy is to simply suicide a non-Sphinx Triamid monster into one of your opponent's monsters, taking some amount of damage, and then dropping Sphinx from the hand and letting it get revenge for its fallen brethren. Sphinx also does a nice job of being an attack magnet for all monsters, not just Triamid, which 99% of the time basically acts as a walking threatening roar, because your opponent might as well not attack if Sphinx is the only monster it can attack. However, Sphinx does need a Triamid card partner on the field to get that attack boost, and with no inherent protections, it will need a card like Fortress to help it maintain a reasonable level of field presence most of the time. I like running the Goldilocks count of 2 copies of Sphinx. Note that all non-Sphinx Triamid monsters have the common effect of being able to swap a Triamid field spell for another Triamid field spell during the opponent's turn by sending the first from the graveyard to the field, and then placing one with a different name from the deck to the field. Master is far and away the worst monster in the archetype. The destruction effect is rather pathetic because it only targets set cards. Yes, it is supposed to be a counterpoint to Pulse, but still it is rather sad. The fact that it is a 1-to-1 is also rather weak. Now, some may argue that the point of Master is to pop one of your field spells to net the set card destruction and the effect of the field spell going to the graveyard, but when thinking about that play beyond a vacuum, the plus is not really a plus, because you're losing the field spell, so no swapping during the opponent's turn. Basically, in my opinion, Master popping a field spell will typically hurt you more than help you, with the only time it being meaningfully useful is when it triggers a Sphinx summons, and you can use that Sphinx then to basically end the duel. This is especially true if you do not have another field spell in hand to put on the field after Master pops your first field spell. Also, Master's a level 4, which is not helpful at all when the other 2 bettered monsters are level 3s. I run 2 copies largely because of the name and the general lack of Triamid monsters, otherwise I wouldn't run any. Hunter is the best non-Sphinx monster in the archetype. The second normal summons is incredibly useful and, in a sense, defines the strength of the archetype, especially when paired with a certain second archetype, because the second normal summon does not have to be a Triamid monster, only a rock monster. I feel anything less than 3 copies is just asking for inefficiency and trouble. Dancer is an interesting card, for it acts as one of the 2 means to recycle field spells, being the far better one from a resource utilization standpoint, in addition to an excellent stat augmenter, because unlike a lot of stat augmenters that see their effects end during the end phase, Dancer's augmentation does not. Dancer also supports the general strategy of the deck due to its effect hitting all rock monsters. Obviously, the biggest problem with Dancer is her anemic attack and the inability to put her innately in defense position off of a normal summons. Dancer is not great, but she's good enough in her own right, and due to the low monster count in the archetype, along with the importance of having Triamid monsters, I run 3 copies. Fortress is a solid field spell, providing a nice, although it can be somewhat forgettable 500 defense boost for all rock monsters. Where Fortress really shines, though, is in the other 2 effects. First, the ability to prevent all Triamid monsters from destruction by card effect is significantly useful in backing up Sphinx and its typical 3000 plus attack power. The third effect is also useful, especially in combination with the opponent turn effect of a non-Sphinx Triamid Master to grab a Hunter from the graveyard to set up your next turn, or a Sphinx and then play a little destruction chicken with your opponent. Commonly, Fortress will hit the field during the opponent's turn, swapping in for a Cruiser, while due to the recycling aspect effects, it seems like maxing out on 3 is a good idea. I disagree with this stance, for running certain field spell ratios can produce a lot of inefficiency, even with the graveyard effects of the field spells. Also, Dancer and Pulse can recycle your field spells, increasing their individual efficiency. With that said, I only run 2 copies of Fortress. Cruiser is far and away the best field spell. The life point gain effect is actually rather nice because most of the time you will net a good 1,000 to 3,000 extra life points over the course of the duel because it only requires a rock monster normal summon. The draw effect is also nice, especially with respects to the other archetype I like to hybridize, which commonly produce soft pluses rather than break-evens. Finally, the graveyard effect is fantastic, helping you get that Sphinx in hand early in the game, forcing your opponent to either be more careful than desired when dealing with your non-Sphinx Triamid, or be forced to use resources to stop Sphinx, opening the door for other strategies to pounce. One of the most common opening plays is getting Cruiser on the field, then sending it to the graveyard during the opponent's turn, replacing it with a Fortress, and searching Sphinx. 3 copies. King Golem is the worst field spell by a large margin in my opinion, for while the 500 attack boost is nice, its usefulness is largely situational because Sphinx does not need the attack boost, and everything else does not really benefit from it until the timing is right. The Armades portion of the effect is also rather selective, great against decks like Zodiacs and back row heavy decks, but does little against decks like ABCs and Infernoid. Again, the value of this effect is largely based on timing. Finally, the graveyard effect is rather muted, simply due to the fact that Sphinx doesn't need it, and the rest of the probable targets are not really valuable to summon from the hand unless, you guessed it, the timing is right. But destroying it for the summons and losing the attack boost is rather silly in my opinion. With the general lack of potential, the draw efficiency problems field spells typically have, and the timing aspect of this card, which can be managed fairly well by Triamid's ability to swap field spells. This card as it is now, and the deck as it's structured now, really only needs 1 copy, so that's how many I run. 1 copy of King Golem. Pulse is a quality card for the deck, largely for its interruption ability. The ability to destroy a face-up card on the opponent's field for the cost of banishing 2 rock monsters and or field spells from the graveyard. Once again, the fact that it only needs rock monsters, not Triamid monsters, saves the day for the usability of this card. Pulse is one of the most annoying cards in this deck because it has Triamid in its name. It just sits on the field, removing the opponent's cards turn after turn, and if the opponent tries to destroy it, bam, there's that pesky Sphinx. The only real annoying thing for the player about Pulse is that it's not searchable, otherwise it would be a mini nightmare for the opponent. The draw effect is rather rare in my eyes because while this deck can cycle field spells, cycling is really not that fast unless you're pretty lucky with your draws, and even then using those field spells to destroy 1.5 in a sense opponent cards with Pulse's destruction effect typically works out better in the long run than drawing a single card, and 1 or 2 more cycles going. Overall, the economics of the field spell recycling of this card are rather bad, especially because you do have to also invest the banishment of those 2 rock monsters to even start the recycling to begin with. I like running 2 copies of Pulse because it is not searchable, so returning it to the deck with Dancer really is not that useful. With only 8 cards in the archetype, and 18 cards in the deck so far, obviously the deck needs to partner up with another group of cards to hit the competitive field. Unfortunately, in my opinion, too many people pair it with the wrong partner, Kokemaru Rock Stun. Over the course of this deck build, I have made somewhat vague references to the strength of the archetype. So, what is the principal strength of this archetype? Despite such a few number of cards, when looking at the effects of what Triamids have to offer, the strengths are swarming and numbers. Hunter grants a second normal summons of a rock monster. Dancer increases the attack of all rock monsters on the field. Sphinx follows up with huge damage in case of destruction. Pulse pops face-up cards as long as you have rock fuel in the graveyard. Master, well, Master sucks, but it has Triamid in its name. All of the field spells have effect more akin to swarming the field than anything else. Despite a lack of overall support from a numbers perspective, Triamids want to swarm. Basically, they want to go fast. In contrast, Rockstun does not want to go fast, or at least does not have efficient capacity to do so. It plods along, attempting to control the duel and eventually wear down the opponent, something that is actually rather difficult to do in this era of Yu-Gi-Oh! With a bunch of one-for-one negation. It will be a little easier after Link summoning, but not that much easier. Also, there are two other meaningful conflicts. The level mismatch, where the two best Triamid monsters are level 3, and all Quokimaru rock monsters that are typically used in Rockstun are level 4, and the rock in hand at the end phase requirement for Quokimaru monsters, which limits the ability to swarm in the first place while maintaining your Quokimaru field control. These style differences make Rockstun a low-efficiency partner. So if the most popular hybrid choice is an inefficient choice, what do I believe to be the better choice? A good hybrid choice needs to be rock, principally level 3, and want to go fast, just like Triamids. Thankfully, there is an archetype that meets these characteristics. Electromagnet Warriors. Electromagnet Warriors provide deck thinning, some level of power, speed, versatility, another quality boss monster, and extra deck compatibility to complement Triamids, and the two sides work very well together. For the Electromagnet Warrior portion of the deck, I run 2 copies of Alpha, 2 copies of Beta, 2 copies of Gamma, and 2 Delta, along with 1 copy of Berserkion and 1 copy of Magnet Field. The nice thing about Magnet Field is that Hunter receives its second normal summon effect if a field spell is on the field, not just a Triamid field spell. So Hunter plus Magnet Field can really pile up the monsters on the field for a given turn. Again, filling this we want to go fast, swarming aspect of the deck. Also, Magnet Field's bounce effect really helps this deck get past some of those more annoying threats like those pesky, oh, I can't be destroyed by card effect Crystal Wing Synchro Dragons. Yeah, but you can be bounced back to the extra deck. Overall, I could talk further about how effective these two pairings are together, but realistically, just play the deck for yourself and you'll quickly realize why it works so well. Finally, some nice quality generic rock monsters round out the monsters in 1 copy of Block Dragon, providing power and some nice protection, especially for Sphinx, 1 giant Sentry of Stone for that cheap extra 1300 damage pop, rank 3x Z-play, and some solid defense for using a card effect to outstone is rather frustrating for the opponent because of the type of monster it is, and it may be required with Stone sitting at 2500 defense with a Fortress on the field. And lastly, 3 copies of Dokidoki, which is fantastic in combination with Hunter, and significantly increases the speed of the deck. For the remainder of the spells, I run 3 copies of Terraforming, yeah, shocking, I know, 1 copy of Raigeki, 1 copy of Upstart for increased consistency, and 1 copy of Foolish Burial for increased deck efficiency, for there are a number of monsters that are a nice dump, either for fuel or for their effects. Finally, for the remaining traps, I run 1 copy of Torrential Tribute to interrupt the opponent, as well as potentially trigger Sphinx summoning. For the extra deck, I run 1 copy of 103 Ragna 0 to deal with Zodiacs, but this really could basically be anything. 1 copy of number 106 Giant Hand, 1 copy of Castel, the Skyblaster Musketeer, 1 copy of Gagaga Cowboy, 3 copies of Gorgonic Guardian, 1 copy of Phantom Knight of Breaksword, 1 copy Super Quantal Mech Beast Granpulse, 1 copy of Soul of the Silvermountain, 1 copy of Leviair the Sea Dragon, 1 copy of Mechquipped Angineer, another option to help defend Sphinx, 1 Wind-Up Zemanes, 1 Giant Soldier of Steel, and 1 number F0 Utopic Future. In the end, Triamid is actually an archetype that has a lot of potential and could be an excellent pure archetype in the future if it ever received more quality support. Granted, the likelihood of any new support is anyone's guess. Fortunately, though, for those who want to play the deck now, Electromagnet Warriors provide a beautiful partner in crime for the deck, especially when filling the power and swarming gaps. Both archetypes have quality searching and speed that can flow seamlessly into meaningful power play, in addition to providing overall versatility. So, brass tacks, are Triamid Electromagnet Warriors competitive? While not Tier 1 and Electromagnet Warriors in a pure form are probably better, they are definitely good enough to be more than just a casual deck, which for a lot of decks in the game right now is really the only thing you can hope for. Well, that is my Triamid deck. Thank you for your attention and your time. I'm out.